Chapter 5. The next bus to Arriaga was leaving in 20 minutes, but if they waited until the afternoon, they could take a bus run by a different travel company for half the price, about 100 pesos less for each of them. How many quetzales is that? Jaime whispered as they stood at the ticket counter of the bus terminal. His question was directed to Angela, but the attendant, an old man with thick glasses, answered without looking up. About 50. Two for the afternoon bus, please, Angela said at the same time as Jaime said, the cheaper bus is fine. 100 pesos, 50 quetzales. Enough to buy 10 Coca-Colas or 20 bread rolls. Some people in his village didn't even earn much more than that in a day. Of course, it was nothing compared to all the money sewed in their jeans, but enough to make them realize just how much money they would still need to get to the Rio Bravo, the river dividing the two countries in the north. With several hours to kill, they walked around Tapachula. People strolled on the shady side of the street. Men called out for them to buy icy juices in big styrofoam cups cinched with plastic bags for lids. Women sold mangoes, guava, papaya, mamey, 3 for 10 pesos. Boys younger than Jaime wandered around with trays strapped to their chests to sell packs of cigarettes. Unlike at home, where everything was in dire need of fresh paint and repairs, two buildings, the municipal palace and the church, were true works of art. When they entered the yellow and white church, Iglesia de San Agustin, with its tall, impressive pillars, Jaime couldn't stop looking around, feeling like he was within art itself. Never had he experienced something so beautiful and intense. For the first time since Miguel's death, he felt at peace. Why did they need to go all the way to Tomas, when here was a place so spectacular that nothing bad could possibly happen, and where they were still close enough to see home? The wood creaked as Angela slid into a pew near the front. Hands clasped, she bowed her head. Her lips moved in silent prayer while two gringo tourists took pictures, their babbling voices echoing across the pews. Jaime took a second to say his own prayer for his family, Miguel, Angela, and himself, before pulling out the sketchbook and lead pencil he'd packed in his bag. Mama always said his artistic ability was a gift from God. If that was the case, then surely he wouldn't mind if Jaime used his gift to pay tribute in his house. It took 4 pages in the sketchbook to do justice to the beautiful church. He wished he could capture the sensation of being there as well, of being enveloped in the art, a feeling that he couldn't explain in words or show in his drawing. The architecture, the way the light came in the stained glass windows. Jaime knew that there were people who studied art, who knew tricks of shadow and light to accent features and make the flat paper's two-dimensional image jump out like it had three-dimensional life. Jaime, whose school couldn't afford an art teacher, did the best he could. The result, though, nowhere near the real-life beauty of the church, wasn't half bad. Angela's hand on his shoulder brought him out of his reverie. From the way the light shifted through the stained glass windows, he guessed it must be midday, hours since they had arrived. What a blessing it was, being in a place where it was so easy to forget everything that had happened. Across the street from the church, they settled on a bench at Parque Central Miguel Hidalgo, a stone-paved plaza with a fountain, white-painted tree trunks, and manicured hedges instead of the bare, compressed dirt park back home where Miguel had. No, Jaime wasn't going to think of that park again. The midnight feast Abuela had made for them back home seemed ages ago. They peered into the plastic food bags Abuela had sent off with them, tamales wrapped in banana leaves, a hunk of queso fresco, chorizo from relatives in the neighboring village, mangoes from the tree behind his house, and a pile of her homemade tortillas. Jaime stopped himself from grabbing half the chorizo and cheese. How long do we have to make this food last? As long as possible. Angela grabbed the smallest tamale and began unwrapping the leaves. 3 bluish-gray pigeons strutted back and forth in front of them, just far enough away to keep from being kicked. How long do you think this trip is going to take? Jaime focused on the tamale instead of his cousin. I forgot to ask Papa. More like he hadn't wanted to ask. Not then, and not really now. The less he knew, the less responsible he'd have to be. Much better to let the grown-ups make the arrangements, let Angela make the choices. Then if something went wrong, he wouldn't be blamed. Angela shook her head. I don't know Tina at school once mentioned her papa made it in 4 days, but Marisol's took forever, several months. Months? Jaime choked. How could they possibly survive months? They had left home only 12 hours ago, and already he felt lost without his family. What happened when the food was gone, when there was no one to take care of him? Angela looked behind her and around the park. Other than the pigeons, there was no one within earshot. She continued talking. There's a lot we'll need to sort out along the way. Our parents spent more time borrowing money than ironing out the details. Jaime's hand landed on his waistband. How had his family scraped up so much so quickly and without the Alphas finding out? The guilt that had started upon hearing of Miguel's death twisted and burned in his stomach. It was his fault Miguel had died. Angela must have thought so too. His fault that he was still alive, and that his parents sacrificed so much to make sure he remained that way. Do you know Tomas's phone number? Angela asked. Jaime shook his head with another pang of guilt. He had never called his brother. Mama did that, and only after first punching in all the numbers from the phone card into the village payphone, using Tio's cell phone, would have cost too much. Mama wrote it down for me. It's in my bag. Angela pulled a slip of paper from her pocket. Already it was creased and worn around the edges. We should memorize it in case something happens to the paper, or one of us. What? He'd been so worried about what had happened to Miguel, he hadn't given much thought to what might happen to them. To Angela. He grasped Angela's free hand. I'm not letting anyone or anything hurt you. She avoided his gaze. Still, we should know his number. She was right, of course. It'd be stupid not to. Paper could get worn, torn, and easily lost. But by memorizing the number, he would accept the possibility that she might leave him and join Miguel. He didn't want to tempt fate. Please, Lord, don't make me responsible for another tragedy, he prayed before studying the paper in Angela's hand. He ran the 10 digits around his head, repeating them like a poem and putting emphasis and beats after certain numbers to remember them better. 5-7, he chanted like an intro to a song. 5-5-5-5, he tapped steadily against his leg 4 times. 21, like a question. 86, like the response. 5-7, 5-5, 5-5, 21, 86. He'd have to say it to himself again later. Okay, got it. He heard the rhythm of the numbers and visualized them in his head. He'd done his part. He didn't need to know anything else. Angela disagreed. She folded the paper and returned it to her pocket. We get to Arriaga and stay the night at a refugee shelter Padre Lorenzo arranged, Iglesia de Santo Domingo. From there, we have to contact El Gordo, who's already been paid to take us on the train north to Ciudad, Mexico. See, I heard about El Gordo, Jaime interrupted. Maybe if Angela thought he knew what was going on, they could finally change the subject. Mama said Herman Domingo's cousin used him, but he was expensive. Angela nodded her head several times. In the capital, a man named Santos got a deposit to get us on the next train. We'll pay the rest when we meet him, which should get us to Ciudad Juarez. And then we cross the Rio Bravo, Jaime added, despite his resolution to remain ignorant. And then we cross the Rio Bravo, she agreed, which they call the Rio Grande in El Norte. Crossing the border of Mexico into Los Estados Unidos, Tia's words of keeping the money safely sewed into their jeans rang in his ears. But even with the money, how would they manage it? What he knew of that crossing already terrified him. News reports showing immigration patrol officers shooting anything that moved. Detention centers packed with people. Politicians over there who said all immigrants were rapists and criminals. And before that, there was Ciudad Juarez, the Mexican border city notorious for its violent and human trafficking. It didn't sound like Angela knew how they would manage either. His tamale remained on his lap, untouched. He unwrapped it, pretending it was steamed and served warm with abuela's chia salsa. Jaime felt as though he already knew too much. Friends at school talked. Advertisements on television and on billboards warned of the horrors. In an illegal journey of 4,000 kilometers, they were going through places more corrupt than his village, running from gangs more violent than the Alphas, going to a country where no one, except Tomas, wanted them there. Everywhere they go on this journey, they'd be unwelcome. 5-7, 5-5, 5-5, 21, 86. The banana leaf wrapper from his lap fluttered against a light post, where 2 pigeons pecked it to death. He and Angela had to talk about something else. After a tamale and a mango apiece, they weren't full, but the food filled with abuela's love comforted them. They walked around the park some more and settled on a different bench, this time near the statue of Benito Juarez, a Zapotec Indian revolutionary hero in the mid-1800s who became one of Mexico's greatest presidents. Juarez hadn't been influential for Guatemala, but they studied him in school, just like they learned about Abraham Lincoln and Mahatma Gandhi. Angela rested with her head on Jaime's lap, her arms folded over her backpack on her chest. When they were younger, Papa used to call them, along with Miguel, Hugo, Paco, and Luis after Donald Duck's nephews. They sometimes fought, they sometimes ganged up on one another, but at the end of the day, they'd curl up together like puppies in a litter. They hadn't slept that way in years, but Angela never went through the phase of being too old to cuddle and comfort her little brother and cousin. Jaime hoped he never did either. He pulled out his sketchbook from his own bag and balanced it on the armrest of the bench as he sketched with broad strokes the statue of the great hero. If there was a presidente like Juarez now, do you think gangs like the Alphas would be taking over Mexico and Central America? Angela asked, her eyes shut, but she faced the statue as if contemplating him through closed lids. No, he wouldn't allow it. Jaime glanced from the statue to a sketchbook and back to the real statue as his left hand shaded in his eyes. People even say that if Benito Juarez had come to Guatemala 150 years ago, we would have never had the civil war our parents and grandparents lived through. He was that great. Angela stayed quiet for such a long time. Jaime thought she had fallen asleep. Do you think we'll ever go back? She asked. Jaime looked around the picturesque park with its fountain and gazebo, the church that had made Jaime feel like he was living in art, and the statue of the man who changed Mexican history. But the view of Volcan Tacana, half in Guatemala, half in Mexico, was blocked by the buildings, as if it weren't there. Yone say, I hope so. You think it'd be safe? If gang members beat someone to death for not joining them, what would they do to two who ran away to avoid joining them? Maybe in 5 or 10 years when they've forgotten us, or if Benito Juarez reincarnates and there's a revolution. Angela let out a snort that was half laugh, half disappointment. I don't believe in that Mayan legend that a great king will return. Then no.